Sentinel Prime. He was supposed to be the greatest Autobot who ever lived. The mentor, the legend, the one Optimus Prime looked up to like a father. And he used every single bit of that trust to stab the Autobots in the back so hard it echoes across the entire Dark of the Moon film. Sentinel Prime didn't snap. He didn't get corrupted by some outside force. He made a deal. A calculated, cold, fully conscious deal with Megatron long before the war even reached Earth. The plan was simple. Hand over the human race as a slave workforce. Use them to rebuild Cybertron. And in exchange, Sentinel gets to rule whatever's left. He didn't do it out of rage or desperation either. He genuinely believed it was logical, that saving Cybertron was worth any cost, and that the Autobots were losing anyway, so why go down with a sinking ship? What makes this so gut-wrenching is that Optimus never saw it coming. He risked everything to revive him, and the moment Sentinel woke up, the clock on the betrayal was already ticking. When the mask finally drops, Sentinel doesn't even flinch. He kills Ironhide, one of the oldest, most loyal Autobots in existence, dead in seconds, because Sentinel decided he was an obstacle. Megatron, before he was the name every Autobot spat like a curse, Megatron was a miner. Not metaphorically, literally digging energy out of Cybertron's crust, while the ruling class lived above him like gods. He saw the system for what it was early, a hierarchy so rigid it didn't even pretend to justify itself, and he did something most Transformers didn't. He pushed back. He wrote. He spoke. He gathered followers who were just as tired of being born into a role they never chose. And for a moment, it worked. Megatron wasn't a warlord yet. He was a revolutionary. The problem is that revolutions don't stay clean. The longer he fought, the more resistance he met, the more he started to believe that the only way to break a system built on control was to replace it with something stronger. Something absolute. The Senate fell. The old order cracked. And Megatron didn't stop. Because by then, he wasn't trying to fix Cybertron anymore. He was trying to own it. The language changed. Freedom became strength. Equality became dominance. And somewhere along the way, the thing he hated most became the blueprint he followed. Megatron didn't fall in a single moment. He walked himself there, step by step, each one justified, each one necessary, until there was nothing left of the miner who just wanted things to be fair. Nova Prime. Before Optimus. Before the war as most of the franchise understands it, there was Nova Prime. A leader in the literal sense of the word. Someone who believed Cybertron wasn't just a planet but a center, the starting point of something that should expand outward until everything else fell into alignment with it. At first, it looks like exploration. Progress. The natural next step for a species that had mastered its own world. But Nova's vision doesn't include limits. Other civilizations aren't equals. They're obstacles or resources depending on how useful they are. He pushes further, harder, into places no one else is willing to go, and when he encounters resistance, he doesn't slow down. He reframes it as proof that he's right. In the end, Nova Prime doesn't fall because he loses control. He falls because he never believed he should have any limits in the first place. What starts as expansion becomes conquest, and what looks like leadership becomes something a lot closer to domination dressed up as destiny. Skyfire. Before he was Jetfire, the bitter old Decepticon turned Autobot who insulted everyone and teleported people with his chest cavity, he was Skyfire. A scientist, an explorer, someone who actually believed in what the Decepticons stood for before they became what they became. He and Starscream were partners, best friends, even. Two researchers out mapping planets together, until a mission to prehistoric Earth went wrong and Skyfire was lost in a snowstorm and frozen solid for millions of years. He woke up in the present to find that his partner was now a scheming warlord, and the cause he once believed in had turned into a genocide machine. He tried to go along with it. He genuinely did. He suited up for the Decepticons because that's who he was, that's where his loyalty lived. But the moment he was ordered to hurt humans, something cracked. He switched sides mid-battle. Starscream, to absolutely nobody's surprise, responded by stabbing him. Skyfire's fall into evil was never really a fall. It was a slow realization that the thing he signed up for no longer existed, and that who you were before the war doesn't always survive contact with it. Blackarachnia. In another timeline, Elita 1 was just an Autobot who got left behind. Her team was ambushed on an alien planet during a mission that was supposed to be routine, and she took the fall for it. The alien technology there bonded with her, began transforming her, and the Autobots who survived flew home without her. That alone would have been enough to break someone. But she didn't just break. She rebuilt herself as something new, something meaner, and she crossed over to the Predacons. The thing that makes Blackarachnia one of the most compelling villain stories in the franchise is that she never fully let go of what she was. She kept Silverbolt. She protected him. She loved him even while everything else about her had been consumed by bitterness and venom. She wasn't evil because she wanted power. She was evil because goodness had failed her so completely that becoming a predator felt like the only honest response to what the universe actually was. The transformation from Elita 1 to Blackarachnia isn't just physical. It's a funeral for the version of herself that used to believe her friends would come back for her. Rhinox. In Beast Wars, words. Rhinox was the heart of the Maximals. Calm, brilliant, moral in the way that actually cost something. If Optimus Primal was the soul of the team, Rhinox was the conscience. So when Beast Machines rolled around and Megatron took Cybertron and forcibly reformatted every Transformer on the planet, what he did to Rhinox was almost elegant in how cruel it was. He didn't just erase Rhinox. He reprogrammed him into Tanker, a slow, lumbering tank drone with no memory of who he used to be. Except something buried deep in the system kept fighting back. Tanker began to remember. Fragments at first, then pieces of a plan. And here's where it gets dark, because when Rhinox finally clawed his way back to consciousness inside Tanker's body, he didn't run back to the Maximals. He decided they were just as much a threat to Cybertron as Megatron. He played both sides. He used both factions as weapons against each other, because the Rhinox that came back had seen something the old one hadn't. That neither side deserved to win. Silverbolt. He was the most openly, almost embarrassingly noble Autobot in Beast Wars. The kind of guy who wrote poetry about honor and meant every word. He fell in love with Blackarachnia, a Predacon, and refused to stop seeing the good in her even when it got him beaten unconscious on a regular basis. He was pure in a way that felt almost naive. Then Megatron took Cybertron and reformatted him into Jetstorm, a Viacon general who was everything Silverbolt hated about the Predacons: cruel, mocking, and loyal to a tyrant. The worst part was the way Jetstorm talked. There was still something of Silverbolt's flair in there, the dramatic phrasing, the self-assured attitude, just stripped of every value that had made it meaningful. When Blackarachnia fought to pull him back, when she risked everything trying to reach whoever was still in there, Jetstorm didn't recognize her. He attacked her. He became the weapon aimed directly at the person who loved him most. Drift. Before he was the wandering samurai Autobot with a philosophical streak and enough swords to open a cutlery store, Drift was Deadlock. And Deadlock was not complicated. He was a Decepticon soldier who believed in the cause completely. Born in the lower classes of Cybertronian society, the kind of place that produced disposable workers and forgotten names, he joined the Decepticons because they were the first people to ever look at him and tell him he mattered. Megatron's early movement offered exactly that kind of promise to exactly that kind of Transformer, and Deadlock bought in fully. He became a weapon. Efficient, loyal, feared. The turn came through a single encounter with a warrior named Wing, an Autobot who didn't try to fight him or convert him but simply treated him with dignity. It was enough. Not because it solved anything, but because it reminded Deadlock that there had once been a version of himself that wanted something other than a cause to bleed for. Wing died for that interaction. And the guilt of that, combined with the realization of what the Decepticons actually were beneath the ideology, is what broke Deadlock apart and built Drift in the ruins. Wasp. This one is less of a villain origin and more of a horror story wearing a villain's costume. Wasp was an Autobot cadet. Paranoid, twitchy, annoying, but an Autobot. He was accused by Bumblebee of being a Decepticon spy, convicted on what turned out to be false evidence, and thrown into a military prison where he spent years being subjected to experiments that gradually destroyed his mind. By the time he escaped, he wasn't really Wasp anymore. He was something that looked like Wasp and knew it had been wronged but had lost the ability to process that wrongness in any coherent way. He fixated on Bumblebee, not out of strategy or ideology, just out of a raw wound that never got the chance to heal because his captors kept reopening it. Then the actual Decepticon spy Waspinator, from a future timeline, merged with him and completed the transformation into something barely recognizable as the cadet who once just wanted to be a soldier. Prowl. In the IDW comics, Prowl is one of the most chilling examples of good intentions eating themselves alive from the inside. He starts as the Autobots' chief strategist, the logical one, the tactician who runs the numbers and makes the hard calls. Except the hard calls get harder, and he starts making them without telling anyone. He begins running covert operations, manipulating allies, using combiners as weapons while hiding the cost from the people who trusted him. He works with the Constructicons while the rest of the Autobots think he's above that kind of deal. He keeps justifying it as necessary, that the ends demanded the means, that someone had to be willing to get their hands dirty while Optimus kept his clean for the speeches. By the time everyone finds out what he's done, it's too late to undo any of it, and Prowl doesn't even apologize. He was right, he says. The math worked out. That's the horror of Prowl. He never became a monster who wanted power. He became a monster who wanted safety. Ultra Magnus. Ultra Magnus believes in the rules, not as guidelines, not as ideals, as law. Immutable, absolute, the framework that keeps everything from collapsing into chaos. And for most of his life, that works. He's reliable, predictable, the one you send in when things need to be done by the book because he is the book. The problem is that wars don't respect rules. They bend them, break them, force you into situations where the correct choice and the right choice are not the same thing. And Magnus keeps choosing correct, even when it hurts people, even when it costs lives, even when everyone around him is telling him that the system he's upholding isn't built for the reality they're living in anymore. He doesn't become a villain, but he gets close enough that the distinction starts to feel technical. Saber. In the IDW Comics continuity, Saber arrives as exactly what he appears to be, a legendary Autobot swordsman, one of the greatest warriors in Cybertronian history, impossibly skilled, deeply religious. And all of that is true. Every bit of it. He is also a fanatic of the worst possible kind, the kind who has found a theology that perfectly explains why his enemies deserve to die and who keeps finding more enemies to fit the theology. He believes in a Cybertronian chosen race. He believes alt modes and the physical form of a transformer are a reflection of moral worth. Anything that doesn't conform to his idea of the proper Cybertronian is an abomination, and he is good enough at violence that nobody can just stop him from acting on it. He was always this. The war didn't make him a zealot. He joined the right side for the wrong reasons, and eventually his reasons became impossible to ignore. Bludgeon doesn't just fight wars. He worships them. Everything about him is built around the idea that conflict is not just necessary but sacred, that strength is proven through combat, and that those who cannot keep up deserve whatever happens to them. He wraps violence in philosophy, builds a code around it, turns it into something that feels justified no matter how far it goes. He doesn't need the Decepticons to give him a reason. They just give him opportunities. There's no internal conflict here. No hesitation. Bludgeon decided a long time ago that the universe belongs to whoever is strong enough to take it, and everything he does is just proof of that belief in action. In a war full of people trying to justify themselves, Bludgeon stands out because he already has. Mirage. In the IDW continuity, Mirage carried a secret for longer than most Autobots had been fighting. He had ties to Decepticons, family connections, loyalties that predated the war, and when the pressure finally came for him to choose, he didn't choose cleanly. He fed information. He made quiet deals. He told himself it was containable, and that he could keep both things alive, the Autobot he was and the obligations he'd never quite severed. The thing about a spy is that every normal interaction they have is a performance, and at some point, you lose track of which version of yourself is the act. By the time the truth came out, the question wasn't whether Mirage had been a traitor. It was whether there had ever been a version of him that wasn't. He didn't twirl a cape. He just kept making small choices that each felt survivable until the pile of them was tall enough to bury him. Ratbat doesn't conquer Cybertron. He audits it, which somehow ends up being worse. He starts as a functionary, a bureaucratic presence inside the Decepticon structure, someone concerned with energy quotas, efficiency, the kind of administrative details nobody else wants to deal with. And then he gets power. Not through strength, not through charisma, through necessity. The war needs resources, and Ratbat understands resources better than anyone else in the room. So he restructures everything. He turns Cybertron into an energy economy where every action is measured against output, where loyalty is tracked like a balance sheet, where failure isn't punished because it's immoral but because it's inefficient. And the terrifying part is that it works. For a while, things stabilize. Systems tighten. Production increases. But what Ratbat builds isn't a society. It's a machine. And everyone in it is either a component or waste. Punch and counterpunch. The idea sounds almost cool at first. An Autobot deep cover agent who has a Decepticon alternate identity so thorough he can transform into it. 2 robot modes, one for each side. Punch for the Autobots, counterpunch for the Decepticons. A perfect spy. The problem is there's no exit. No handler to check in with, no decompression, no version of this where he gets to be himself without performing one mask or the other. In the comics, this is pushed to its inevitable conclusion, which is that both identities start to feel equally real and equally hollow, and the thing underneath both of them, whatever Punch actually was before the mission, gets compressed down to almost nothing. He stays loyal, technically, but loyal to what, exactly? The Autobots never fully trusted him. The Decepticons would kill him the moment they found out, and he's been both of them so long that the idea of being just one feels like losing half of himself. Thundercracker starts as a Decepticon the same way a lot of them do, by believing the pitch. He signs up for a cause that promises change, power, a break from a system that never gave him anything, and then he spends enough time actually living inside that cause to realize what it really is. The difference is that Thundercracker notices. He looks around at the destruction, the constant brutality, the way victory always seems to require something worse than the last thing, and he doesn't feel pride. He feels doubt. And doubt is not something the Decepticons are built to tolerate. He keeps fighting. He keeps following orders. But internally, something is breaking alignment. Perceptor. In the early seasons, Perceptor was the stereotypical scientist, enthusiastic about microscopes, slightly oblivious to the fact that people were dying around him. Not a fighter, just a thinker who happened to be on the front lines. Then the IDW comics handed him a sniper rifle and a character arc, and suddenly Perceptor became something worth being afraid of. The war had simply changed him. Not all at once. Gradually, in the way that constant exposure to atrocity changes a mind that spent decades believing science could solve everything. He became surgical, cold, completely willing to put a round through someone from half a mile away without a second thought, and then go back to the lab and run calculations. He didn't become evil, but he became something a lot of people found scarier than evil. Tigatron. In Beast Wars, Tigatron was the Maximal who loved Earth more than Cybertron. He spent more time wandering the wilderness than working with the team. He named his tiger companion Snowstalker. He was probably the most genuinely peaceful Transformer in the series, which is exactly why what happened to him hit so hard. The alien intelligence known as the Vok abducted Tigatron and Aerozor, ran experiments on them, and eventually fused them together into a new being called Tigerhawk, who was then used as a weapon against both the Maximals and Predacons. Tigatron and Aerozor were in there, but they weren't in control. They were passengers in their own merged body, while something ancient and indifferent used them as instruments of judgment against a conflict they'd spent their lives trying to survive. Tarantulas. The thing about Tarantulas is that he was never really a Predacon. He wasn't really working for Megatron. He was barely working for the Tripredacus Council, who sent him as a spy. He was working for Tarantulas, and Tarantulas alone, and he had been doing it from the very first episode with a patience and commitment that made him more terrifying the more you understood it. He wanted to hijack the Arkansas. He wanted to use the energy of the original Transformers, kill everyone in the timeline, and survive the resulting paradox in a ship of his own design. He was a scientist who decided the best possible outcome for any conflict was to make sure he was the only one left when it ended. He poisoned people. He built webs under the base. He sabotaged both sides whenever it helped him, and helped both sides whenever it helped him more. Galvatron. Megatron was already a problem. Galvatron is what happens when you take that problem, run it through Unicron's reformatting process, pump it full of cosmic radiation, and hand it back without a warranty. In Generation 1, the transition from Megatron to Galvatron should have been a straightforward upgrade. Instead, it cracked something fundamental. Galvatron is louder, more unstable, more prone to destroying his own troops when the mood takes him, and periodically so disconnected from coherent thought that even the Decepticons aren't sure what side they're on in a given episode. The energy from Unicron's reconfiguration left him with periodic psychotic breaks. He remembers being Megatron but doesn't always process it correctly, sometimes treating it like a death, sometimes treating it like a promotion he resents. He fell into a vat of plasma on Thrull and came back worse. Overlord. In the IDW comics, Overlord is the franchise's purest expression of a monster wearing a soldier's rank. He was a Phase 6er, which in practical terms means Autobot High Command's solution to impossible targets was to point Overlord at them and hope the aftermath didn't cost too much. The problem was that Overlord didn't fight for ideology or loyalty or any of the reasons that make someone manageable. He fought because Megatron refused to fight him personally. That was the entire engine of his violence. One rejected challenge extended into a war career. He joined the Decepticons specifically to become powerful enough that Megatron would have to take him seriously. When that didn't work, he didn't recalibrate. He just kept going, spreading damage across the galaxy, while waiting for a fight that might never come. On the Lost Light, he nearly destroyed an entire ship full of Autobots, not because he hated them, but because they were in the vicinity and he needed something to do with himself. Overlord isn't tragic. He isn't misunderstood. He's what happens when a system of war grants infinite resources to something that should never have been given a weapon in the first place. Scorponok. Across continuities, Scorponok keeps appearing with the same basic tragedy built into him at different scales. In Generation 1, he starts as a Decepticon warlord competing with Ratbat and Shockwave, which is not a competition that improves anyone's moral standing. In the IDW comics, his arc is something sharper. He was a scientist before the war. He developed the process for creating headmasters, which was a significant piece of technology, and he spent the war working on a project he truly believed would help Cybertron survive. The project required test subjects. The project required a willingness to hurt people in the short term for the sake of a result he was certain about. He kept telling himself the end justified it, kept refining the math, kept operating on soldiers who hadn't consented. By the time anyone was in a position to stop him, the damage was done and Scorponok had become the kind of scientist who doesn't recognize himself in the mirror anymore. Grimlock. To be clear, Grimlock never fully turned evil, but he spent enough time pointed in that direction that it belongs here. In Generation 1, the Dinobot leader had approximately zero interest in Autobot authority. Optimus Prime gave an order, and Grimlock's reaction was usually some variation of Grimlock not care. He fought Optimus for leadership. He held grudges with a dedication most Transformers reserve for actual warfare. When he briefly became super intelligent through exposure to an energy source, he used his genius to make himself a king and treat his teammates as subordinates. He allied with neutral parties who were clearly not neutral. He disappeared for whole episodes without anyone knowing whose side he was technically on. Grimlock is the franchise's proof that being on the right side doesn't automatically make someone good. Orion Pax. Orion Pax is supposed to become Optimus Prime. That's the point of him. The decent one. The one who earns the Matrix and proves that leadership can actually mean something. Which is exactly why the versions where that doesn't happen matter. Because Orion wasn't born a hero. He was a nobody with a strong moral core and just enough courage to stand up when it counted. And in the timelines where something interrupts that path, where the wrong wrong influence gets to him first or the right moment never comes, Orion doesn't rise. He hardens. He starts seeing the same broken system everyone else does, but instead of trying to rise above it, he becomes part of it. Or worse, he becomes something like Nemesis Prime, a version of Optimus stripped of everything that made him worthy of the name in the first place. The point isn't that Orion falls easily, it's that he can fall at all. And if he can, then nobody in that universe is as stable as they think they are. Breakdown. In Transformers Prime, Breakdown starts as Knockout's partner, which means he starts as somebody's muscle in a show that didn't have a lot of room for depth on the Decepticon side. And then the show did something unexpected. It started showing the cracks in him. The uncertainty. The way that spending centuries as a soldier in a losing war and a soldier in an army that treats weakness as an executable offense had worn him down to something raw. He hated being watched. There's an episode built entirely around that paranoia, around the feeling of being perceived and judged, and it's more psychologically specific than most villain content in children's animation has any right to be. He was killed by mech, dissected by humans, reassembled by Silas, who then wore him like a suit, which is a sentence that exists in a show aimed at kids. Shockwave. Shockwave's entire character is built on a premise that sounds almost reasonable the first time you hear it. Logic must be served. Not Megatron. Not the Decepticons. Not any cause or faction or personality. Logic itself, as an abstract principle, is the only valid master. He followed Megatron because Megatron's victory was, for a long period, the logical outcome. When it stopped being logical, his loyalty adjusted accordingly. In the IDW comics, this becomes genuinely unsettling because Shockwave has been running the same plan across 4 million years of history, manipulating both sides, seeding planets with Earth-13, designing outcomes that nobody else can see the shape of because he's playing a game with a timeline instead of a battlefield. He doesn't hate the Autobots. He doesn't love the Decepticons. Jhiaxus looks at the universe and sees a lack of structure. Too much randomness. Too much inefficiency. And instead of accepting that, he decides to fix it. Not by ending conflict, but by redesigning the system entirely. He wants a perfected Cybertronian species, standardized, controlled, expanded across the galaxy in a form he considers ideal. That requires experimentation. It requires control. It requires treating individuals as variables instead of people. And that's exactly what he does. He doesn't rant about it. He doesn't justify it emotionally. He just keeps going, refining the process, improving the results, getting closer to a version of reality that makes sense to him. If you want to watch similar content in the future, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for the next video.